I had a cousin who became an Adrian Dominican. And her mother was my dad's sister, and her father was from Mayo. We're County Roscommon, and so she always heard about home in Ireland, and she always thought Ireland was her home too. So she always wanted to go there, and of course, once she entered, there was no chance of that at that point. But she used to write to us, and we were little children at the time, but we all saw pictures of Adrian Dominicans, what they look like, and so forth. And we met some later on in the 50s. Some Adrian sisters came to Ireland and Rome and Lourdes with their parents, and because my cousin herself couldn't come, she found anyone who was coming, she'd tell them to visit us. So we knew what Adrian Dominicans looked like. So I told my dad that we used to go to Knock on the 15th of August, and if you're not Catholic, you don't understand any of this, but we used to I told my dad I was making a novena to Our Lady of Knock. And whatever sisters I met first that day, that was the group I was going to enter. Now, I thought I had it all arranged, that the Franciscans would be there, and so that, of course, we'd meet the Franciscan missionaries of Mary. And however, as we're walking in, there is an Adrian Dominican walking around the shrine. So I took it as my sign that this is it. And I've never been so upset about anything in my life. I thought, I do not want to go to the States. This is not what I want to do, and this is not Africa or India. And I ended up actually writing to my cousin later and saying, what do I do? And so Mother Gerald Berry was, of course, prioress at the time, and she wrote me a letter welcoming me. I've often said, no psychological testing, no checking me out to see what I was like or any of that. It was all on promise. So she was welcoming me to Adrian. And the funny thing about it is that letter I must have lost. I mean, I must have given it to my mother to hold. And somehow or other, my mother had a sister who was married in England. And she was the youngest of my mom's family, Aunt Sally. And she passed away probably 6 years ago now. And the Christmas before we came to our general chapter, where I was elected, my cousin, Aunt Sally, had died the summer before that. And her son and daughter were cleaning out her things and going through her whatever she had. And they found this letter from Mother Gerald welcoming me to Adrian. So they sent it to me. So this is December, and I go to Adrian for a general chapter in February, and I'm elected as prioress of the congregation. This is, years later. This is 4 years ago now. So I am a big believer in signs.
That's what I was going to say. You had determined that the first order that you saw was the one you were going to do.
Well, I thought it would be the Franciscans.
Oh,
I mean, I was not being,
Why did you not change your mind and say, no, I want to join the Franciscans?
Because I figured I made this bargain, and I told my dad that was going to be it, whichever sisters I met first that day. And I thought, I really believed actually that was a sign from God. And so I went from there.
And do you think so?
And the only reason my father let me go was that all of his brothers and sisters were in Chicago. I found out later from my mom, many years later, that he was willing to let me go because he never thought I'd stay, and he knew I'd be safe in Chicago with my aunts and uncles. So that's how I got to go. It was the absolute right decision for me. I didn't know it then, but I've had the most wonderful life as far as responding as best I know how to God's call, and been given the opportunity for education, for study, for reflection, to really go where the need was, to respond to the poor, and to really live the life that I believe God called me to. So I couldn't ask for anything different, and nor would I want to change anything.
You never had any regrets, any second thoughts?
Well, I certainly did when I was in the novitiate. It was hard going, and I thought, am I sure this is what I want to do? And actually, even my first couple of years out, I had some second thoughts, but I got over that, and I worked with some absolutely wonderful sisters over the years. And when I came out to teach, we had very little training as far as, I don't know how public we want to say this, but we all know we had very little training. And I came to Melbourne, Florida. I had 65 third graders.
In one classroom?
In one classroom. Mm-hmm. And I had never taught school. Now, one of the sisters who taught junior high was my mentor, so she helped me do my lesson plans. However, she was not with me in the classroom, and I discovered really quickly there were 3 really very bright students in that class. There were lots more, but these 3 knew phonics way better than I ever knew phonics. And I remember their names very clearly, Jeff Crane, Dennis Kelleher, and Terry LaBelle. And later on, many years later, when I was working in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was in the paper for something or other, and I got an email from Dennis Kelleher wondering if I was the same sister Attracta who taught him in 3rd grade in Melbourne. And so did I remember him? And I wrote him back and said, of course I remember you. Not only that, I give you, Jeff Crane and Terry LaBelle, credit for getting me through my first year of teaching. And he's a research scientist at the Research Triangle in the Raleigh-Durham area. Then I discovered that Jeff Crane was head of oncology at one of the hospitals right there in Raleigh. So I haven't found Terry LaBelle yet, and the 2 of them did not know where she was, but I do intend to see if I can, before I die, find out where she is.
What a wonderful reunion that would be.
Yeah, yes, uh-huh.
You talked about teaching the children, but a lot of your work has dealing with immigrants.
Well, I went to law school later on in life. I did a lot of different things, actually. Once Vatican II happened, so that ended in 1965, and by 1968 we had what we called our first chapter of renewal. And at that time, Pope John the 23rd called us actually to go back to the charism of the founder and to see what was really Dominic, what would St. Dominic be calling us to do today? And we certainly know study and preaching would be part of the Dominican charism. Prayer, study, preaching, contemplation. But Dominic also was always on the edges. I mean, he was not in the middle of the church or, that in a safe place as such, but speaking on the edge for those who could not speak for themselves, or trying to help people who are on the edge. And that's where we were always, I feel we were always called to be there. And so I did community organizing actually with Sister Pat Seaman in West Tennessee. I was there for 8 years. She was only there for 3, but I was there for 8. And we trained with an organization called Acorn, who became rather infamous, but probably was the best training I've ever gotten. And that is to really discern the local needs, talk to people, listen to people, and find out what do they really want. And I did, so we had the training with them, and the bishop in West Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee at that time, Bishop Dozier, was one of the finest bishops that I know. I'm not usually praising bishops, but anyway, that's an aside. But he was, and he was adamant about our not bringing programs to people. He said, find out what people need, and then get ready to bring them whatever it is they need. And then help them. I think I learned from Acorn, and I certainly have tried to do it ever since, is to, when you go in, especially working with people who don't have an awful lot of education and are poor, to try to enable them to do the work and get yourself out of there as quickly as you can. So train them locally, and then they're empowered to do this work themselves.
What do you think then when you come to Barrie today?
I don't know it at all. I mean, it's so huge, and it's so different than it was. And it looks, I mean, 1,000 times better, and I'm so delighted it is. And it has grown enormously since I've been around. You know,
yeah. You were another prioress at the Adrian Mother House in Michigan.
That's right.
There may be a time where that Mother House is no longer used as a Mother House.
That's true, and we're looking at all of that actually now, because our next general chapter is in 2016, and so we've begun to just start planning for that now, and that's one of the things we're looking at. We're trying to look out 10 years from now. Where will we be? What will our age be like at that point? Who's going to be able to be involved in any of our institutions? What's going to happen with these buildings, and how can we plan for the future?
Isn't there a certain sadness to all of this?
There is in one way, but then I always think that if it's a true mission, it will continue. And whatever it is we believe in, that God wants us to do, what is the Dominican call? So I keep asking us today, and I keep asking myself, you know, if Dominic were around today, or Catherine, you know, what would they be doing? What would they be, where are the margins? Where are the greatest needs? And it might not be in education, or it might not be in healthcare, or it might not be in some of the things that we've done in the past. It might be in something entirely different. And that's what I'm hoping, and we've begun to plan that already, that our younger sisters are looking at, you know, to see where it is that the authentic Dominican call is coming. The other part of it is, we have spent all these years with our institutions, hopefully getting the mission across to these institutions, so that the lay people who are so important and so running the institutions would continue to do that. And so if they believe in the Dominican call, that they will continue that, whether they're sisters here or not.
Do you think lay people can bring the sort of spirit that the sisters have brought for these many, many years, though?
Well,
Can they be taught or trained something that is instinctive?
Well, it might not be exactly the same, but if we believe in preaching the truth, searching for the truth, and preaching the truth, and that's what Dominic would want. If we believe in contemplation, like really contemplating before we make decisions, if we believe in study, real study, and we look at both sides of everything, and if we believe in actually looking at every single person and knowing that God's Spirit is in every single human being, not to even speak of creation, but in every single human being, no matter how opposite to us they might be, and realize that God did create this person. There has to be that spark of God within them. And no matter how hard it is sometimes for us to hear a different message than our own, there's always a little bit of truth there. And so we can learn, anyone can learn to seek truth. But we have to do it with an open heart.
And obviously you would say, and they don't have to be Catholic.
Oh, absolutely not.
Why not? I mean,
well, I don't think we're the only ones who have the edge on the truth. I think anyone who is open to listen to God talking through the other person. I always talk about dialogue, like can we dialogue with each other? And most of the time we don't. Most of the time what we do is I tell you my opinion, you tell me your opinion, and never the twain shall meet. When our leaders of countries are talking, they're supposedly in dialogue. They're really not in dialogue. I mean, they're there to get their point across, and that's about it. If we could truly honor each other enough to dialogue, we would find out that there's very little difference in what we believe. I think, in one sense, what I believed, my understanding of God from, when I was a child, and actually when I was going to Barry back in the 60s, I graduated in 1967. My understanding of God then was, I was so sure I knew who God was. And we had a catechism which told you the answers, And if you didn't find it there, you found it in Scripture, and you thought you actually knew the answer from there. And I've discovered, of course, over the years that God is so much mystery that there's a very little understanding. I have very little understanding of God. The older I get, the more I realize that God is so beyond us that there's no way I ever get other than little slight glimpses every once in a while. And it might be with a gorgeous sunrise, or it might be if I got a chance to go to the ocean, which you don't get in Michigan, I keep telling them. And, those kinds of awe moments where you realize that is the Creator who is so far beyond us, and to try to think that we have the answers is, ridiculous. But
there is nonetheless some nostalgia. I'm sure that the old way is changing and a new, certain way maybe?
Well, I keep saying, with all of the things that are happening in the world today, and I am so aware of all of the Middle East and the African countries, because I've had so many clients from all those countries, I know them very well, and we've, of course, had the Iraqi sisters that we've had and over the years. And all of that's happening, and as soon as you think one thing is almost settled, then you realize it's only the beginning. And so all of that's going on, all of that's happening with the changing climate and what's happening, to our planet. What's happening with the flooding and the fires and the Ebola, and you name it, that's happening. There are times I say, I wish you'd waited for about 20 more years, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. So it's a very different time, clearly a very different time that we're in than even 20 years ago. And so it's a very challenging time, and there are no easy answers to anything. But that's where I think trust comes in, that if we really believe in something and we want it to happen, and we hope that it will happen, we have that desire for it to happen, then I think that's, we can do a little bit, and our little bit is important.
And also I think the reflection you know, as part of the mission, the contemplation. you know,
Contemplation is so important. If we don't do that, I think you know, those who make snap decisions without, and that's very American, you know, and we of course have realized that with when we have a number of sisters now in the Philippines, or Filipino sisters, and they're much more slow in making decisions, and they talk for a long time, and we are so used to okay, here's the agenda, we'll get started, we'll do a little prayer. We have now tried to form our time together as leadership and any group meetings we do, to do a real reflection and spend time reflecting before we get into agenda, which is sort of un-American. But, and I'm not saying, I'm considering myself American too, because I've been here for so long that I'm doing the same critique. And every time I go home, they call me a Yank, so what can I do?
I'm not sure how they mean that either. Okay, one last question, because we have to get you to a dinner, I know.
Yeah.
But do you have, and if you don't, or if you don't want to share it, you don't, but do you have a Sister Linda story?
Well, you know, I served on our general council with Sister Linda from 1986 to 1992. And I have more stories from then, but they're all I couldn't tell you any of them. I could not have any of them recorded. We were all quite young and inexperienced, actually, in that area. And Sister Nadine Foley was our prioress. And that she put up with us, and the antics we got up to was amazing. But we had a wonderful time together, and it's we are friends. We've been friends ever since. I did not know Linda before that, and because she was here at Barry, and I was I went to Montgomery, Alabama after Florida, and was principal of a school there. It's just another whole story that I could tell you sometime, but almost being lynched. But anyway, that's, I went there in 1969 and tried to integrate the school, so that would, right, it was naive on my part, but.
It's rather adventurous for 1969.
Very adventurous, yes. It's when you don't know what you're doing, you know, and you think you do. But that's for some other time.